You're listening to the Daily Sales Tips podcast, and I'm your host, Snot Ingram. Seriously, my audio editor is taking some well-deserved time off, and I'm recording a bunch of these at the peak of this head cold or allergy thing I'm dealing with. But that's my problem and not yours, and the show must go on. Today's tip is an excerpt from my most recent Sales Success Stories podcast interview with Rachel Shih, Senior Manager of Partnerships at Vidyard. Check this out.
Everything you do needs to have a measurable ROI, right? So I'm sure a lot of the people listening to this podcast, a lot of sales leaders listening to this podcast, subscribe to this. It's something that I've encountered, in my entire sales career. The questions you get of, what's the ROI of posting on LinkedIn, right? What's the ROI of you writing this article? What's the ROI of this podcast even? Right? And I think you'll just drive yourself crazy thinking about that. And I also think that there are things in life that do not correlate to a direct measurable ROI, but have immeasurable value nonetheless. And it's because it's the long game, right? We could go into this for a very long time, but it's the long game. I think a lot of salespeople are short-sighted. They think month to month, or they think quarter to quarter. And I think a lot of sales leaders, when they shouldn't, sales leaders should think further out, but they often enable, this kind of myopic approach. And I think it ultimately comes at a detriment to everybody. So yeah, my opinion is that, not everything needs to have an ROI for it to matter.
So well said. And I'm going to double click on that and let you go a little bit longer on this idea, because I think you're right. We've gotten into such short-term thinking, right? We're just looking at the numbers month to month, quarter to quarter, and we're not thinking about that bigger picture. And I think there's so many examples to where it has an exponential impact if you will take a longer kind of multi-year type of view. Yeah.
And, so it's something that's bugged me my entire sales career for sure, right? And even the idea of, you had a great quarter, but now it's next quarter, you're back to zero, you're back to nothing. Even that sort of stuff said in jest, I think has ongoing harmful effects, to be honest, because that's not how people work. People need to feel like that, their efforts have meant something, and efforts are, the outcomes of your efforts are cumulative over time. They're not something that is done month on month or quarter to quarter, right? Like a lot of the efforts that you put in, especially if you think of sort of enterprise sales or even partnerships, like a lot of the seeds that you plant and a lot of the, the conversations that you build and sort of the influence that you exert at all different levels of an organization, that is what ultimately culminates in your big deal at the very end, or your big partnership that you've acquired. Right? It's not, again, I think anyone who has their brain switched on can recognize this fact. And I think, this kind of, this short-sighted type of mentality burns people out. It leads people to think that they're not good at their jobs because maybe they've, not hit quota a month or two, even if they had a really good quarter, the quarter prior, because again, it's just not recognized, right? Revenue leaders, there's a celebration of the final product, right? There's a celebration of the final closed deal. Oh, congratulations, John closed this 6-figure deal. But, what went into that is not considered, right? It's the inputs versus outputs thing. The output is celebrated when really it's the inputs, it's the things that you've done up until that point that should be, because that's what's going to get you that output, right? And we all know of the sales reps who, close big deals, but didn't really do anything for it. Right? You get a big inbound, lead, someone who's just ready to buy, ready to pull the trigger, they've got the budget, et cetera. Closing that deal, that type of deal shouldn't be celebrated, in my opinion, right? Or it shouldn't be you shouldn't pretend that some type of immense sales skill went into closing a deal like that. So I think that's kind of the bone that I have to pick with the sales profession and sort of the way that sales leaders look at the development of their sales reps, because again, it leads to good people churning out of companies. It leads to people burning out and not feeling like their efforts are rewarded because the wrong things are looked at ultimately.
For a link to this full episode and to connect with Rachel, just click over to DailySales.Tips/908 and we'll have everything for you there. Once you've done that, be sure to come back tomorrow for another great sales tip. Thanks for listening.